Hi there, everybody. I'm Fred Thomas, and you are watching All Things Bike. And today we are speaking with Shawn Hunter, cyclist and author of the book Chasing Dawn, an adventure of 3 fathers and 4 teenagers bicycling across America. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Fred. I'm psyched to be here.
Hey, well, thanks for coming down, and congratulations on riding across country and writing a book about it. It's 2 big jobs right there. What was the inspiration?
Well, I mean, it started a few years ago. My buddy Hobbit, he called me up and he's like, "Hunter, let's do this again." And I was like, "Dude, there's no way. I got to get to soccer practice. I got a mortgage. You're nuts." And he said, "No, you don't understand. We're going to take the kids." And I was like, "Oh, right."
Long pause.
Yeah, it's like, let me get back to you.
And teenagers. These are not kids. These are teenagers.
Right.
And I bet every parent, when they hear about this, is wondering, how did you persuade teenagers to go on this?
We didn't give them a choice. We told them, like, this is what we're doing, and this is what's happening, and you don't have a choice.
Right.
And we gave them like 18 months of prep time. So like my son at the time, I probably told him when he was 15, and then we did it when he was 16. And the other kids on the trip were 15, 16, 16, and 17.
Okay. So they're just the right age to sort of sign up and be a part of this and enjoy it. Well, tell us about who was on it. So you've got 3 fathers and 4 teenagers. Yep. Who are they?
Okay, so my friend John, he called me up and he said, "Let's do this." He brought his 17-year-old daughter, and then my friend Erich, he brought both of his boys. So he's got 2 boys at the time. They were 15 and 17, and so it was 3 dads, 4 teenagers, and we flew out to Seattle and did it. And it was an interesting dynamic with the 2 brothers on the trip, because, I mean, they love each other, but of course they would battle at campgrounds and stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, explain a little bit more about that. I mean, what was? I mean, how did that work? Did they fight over the tent, or who rode first? I mean, how did you manage that natural activity?
All right. The basic premise of the entire trip was, if we want our kids to possess this sense of like humility or problem solving or a sense of gratitude, then we should put them in a position like an experiential learning kind of environment where they have to live through these, solve real problems, be actually grateful at the end of a day, that kind of thing. And so on a day-to-day basis, it wasn't necessarily a difficult task. It was, the most difficult part was starting the whole adventure. That was the hard part.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about that in the book, and it occurred to me there are 2 difficulties there. There's the sort of the technical, logistical start, and then there's the psychological aspect of it. So you talk about those 2 elements. The logistics and then the psychological aspect.
Well, this is an important point. So leading up to it, Erich and John and I, these 3 dads, were very meticulous about our planning. We're constantly calling, texting, emailing. We had a couple like FaceTime conferences in which we're battling over Google and the maps and where to go and all that stuff. And then in the end, we almost threw it all out the window, pretty much. Once we got to Seattle, we unpacked the bikes and we got ready to go. And that evening, there was a send-off party for our group at my friend's house in Seattle. And there was a guy who showed up. His name is Willie Weir. Now, for anyone in the adventure cycling world who knows Willie Weir, this guy has cycled, I don't know, he reckons like 100,000 miles or something all over the planet. And he said, he had this piece of advice to us, and he said, well, think about what you want to go on. Are you going on a trip or an adventure? And I said, what? Yeah. He said, well, a trip is planned. Let's, what road you're going to take and who you're going to meet and where you're going to stay and who's going to, it's very methodical. He said, I love trips. Trips are great, but it's not an adventure. An adventure is something that just unfolds, that allows itself to reveal itself over the course of the adventure you're on. And so that night, that like very night, we went out to a pub and we met this guy, and he's like, hey, what are you doing again? You're riding to Maine from Seattle? Hey, guess what? I've got a cabin. It's about 65 miles up in the Cascades. You should stay there. And we're like, well, it wasn't on our planned
Exactly,
route.
totally off the plan, right? But it worked out, right? You guys went up
Yep.
and you had a great time, and you spent a couple extra days, and in the book you describe how enjoyable it was,
Right.
And the other thing that popped into my head, well, were there screens? Did everyone, was there a ban on iPads and stuff like that?
We didn't ban media, but it's pretty difficult to text and ride a bike. I mean, you can do it.
Yeah, but it's not advisable. Okay, so yeah, you created an environment where screens didn't sort of naturally sort of come across and were available.
Right.
And that was that. But talk about the psychological aspects. You're riding across the country with kids. It's out of the comfort zone of most people.
Yeah.
It's something new and challenging. How did you get off that starting line?
Well, of course, there's a lot of adversity in long-distance adventure cycling. And the very first day out of the gate, we're climbing up the Cascades out of Seattle.
Right.
And so there's a ton of adversity and a ton of climbing, and you have to lean into it. In fact, as the weeks went on, across eastern Wyoming into South Dakota, where it's searing hot and we're low on water, and it's getting like turning into a grind.
Degrees,
yeah, it turns into a grind sometimes. In retrospect, you only remember the wonderful parts, the joy of the trip. But the reality is that some days are really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I remember at different points, we'd get together, like group meetings on the trip, and one or two of the kids would say, "Hey, why don't we hitchhike this really difficult part?"
Right.
And we sat down and we're like, "Well, what are we doing? Are we riding this or are we hitchhiking it?"
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess that was healthy in a way. I mean, people had a chance to make suggestions, but you did take a train at one point, and
we did.
And it really worked out, and it was off the it wasn't part of the plan.
That's
and
right.
You got to where you were going, and you had a great evening. So that's great. That's why adventure is in the title.
Exactly.
Well, let's shift gears, as they say, and talk about the equipment that you use, just so viewers have a sense of what you need for this. Talk about the bikes and what you used on them.
Okay, so I personally rode a 1991 Bridgestone RBT steel touring bike.
Yeah, this
with classic panniers. Yeah. And I bought it brand new in '92.
Right.
And I loved it. It ran great. Most of the people on the trip, 4 out of 7 of us, rode sort of like adventure bikes, like a Surly ECR, that kind of bike. Like you sit up right on it with Jones H bars,
right,
and you're kind of in an upright cruising position. Big, fat, wide Schwalbe Big Apple tires.
Wow.
And I thought going into it, they're going to be slower, with all that wind resistance and all the, and they really weren't.
Right.
They weren't much slower at all, actually.
Right, and they had more gears than your bike. Isn't
True.
Some of these things had 1-to-1 ratio. That must have been pretty helpful.
They did have a lot more gears for climbing passes, but it was fine.
Well, then explain a little bit of the route. You started in Seattle.
Yeah.
And you didn't take any sort of identified route that's provided by a third party. You made your way. Just to give us a sense of the terrain and the distance and.
Well, when we started, as you can imagine, if you picture the Pacific Northwest, it's very, very hilly, it's very mountainous. We're not in shape, or as in shape as we would become, and we're carrying a lot of weight.
Right.
So those 3 factors would shorten the miles.
Right.
We studied the adventure cycling maps, but the formal maps that Adventure Cycling publishes, didn't go on the route that we wanted to go to. We wanted to kind of head east across Washington and climb up into Idaho, then into Montana, Missoula.
Right.
We went to Adventure Cycling and said hi to them.
Right.
And then down into Yellowstone, and then across the flats of Wyoming to Devil's Tower, and then on straight across South Dakota. So effectively, we winged it.
Right.
We did have a deadline at the 2-week mark. We had booked a cabin in Yellowstone, just outside of Yellowstone, in Paradise Valley, north of Yellowstone. And it turns out that was both wonderful to have that cabin that we had booked for the group, But on the other hand, it gave us a deadline that we had to march towards.
Right.
So for the first 2 weeks, we're like, it's like a slog. We're like, well, how are we doing on the mileage?
Yeah, a little stressful.
Yeah, but once we made that deadline and relaxed at that lodge in Paradise Valley, the rest of the trip we had no deadlines.
Right.
So we just kind of took it day by day.
And riding 50 to 100 miles per day, roughly?
Well, I don't know. So probably like 3,800 miles in 54, 53 riding days is.
Right. That's the math. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
whatever the math.
We'll do the math later. Well, there was one observation that the ranger at the Yellowstone Park made, which was there are 4 million tourists go to the park, and pretty much none of them get out of their cars. Just contrast that with your experience and what you see and feel when you're riding your bike across the country. How different is it?
Well, I can't emphasize this enough. I think, and probably many of your viewers think cycling speed is like perfect because you can immerse yourself in the landscape, the culture, your people, the people. You're also kind of a curiosity.
You're attracting attention.
What are you doing? And explain what you're doing. But yet it's fast enough that you can cover a lot of ground. I mean, witness, we went across the States in 2 months, which is probably about average among, adventure cyclists. I think it's just a dynamite speed for experiencing the landscape. And in fact, after a few weeks, we got the kids to answer questions. So we'd stop at a convenience store or a restaurant or a motel or something. We get them to answer the questions. Well, what are we doing and where are we going and where are we from?
Yeah, well, that's, again, a great learning experience. And you sent us some great pictures that show the scenery. But before we get to that, there was one observation that you made also, is that there was a point in this whole adventure where the adults started becoming like youth, and the teenagers started becoming more like adults. You would elaborate on that.
We noticed it probably around 3 weeks into the trip. Like, you're deeply immersed in the trip, and the adults, like, we were in our late 40s to early 50s, and I felt like, we the grown-ups were having more fun with it, and like getting younger and more buoyant with the trip and more playful. And I'm telling you, some of the physical benefits were amazing. As you predicted, I lost a lot of weight. But some other weird things, I swear my eyesight got better, like, and my mental acuity and my focus and mindfulness absolutely got better. But at the same time, the goal was for the kids to have this experiential learning trip where they would kind of grow into themselves, and then you witness it, like they do it, because when you're at a campsite or you're trying to find a place to sleep or you're trying to find a restaurant or you're resting somewhere, they have to show up. They have to...
You have to interact.
Yeah, they have to interact, and they have to kind of grow up in a way where they understand that they're part of a group and they're responsible for a meaningful piece of it. So, for example, like if Owen or my son Charlie, like they break their chain or their drivetrain, well, all of us, we're all dead in the water.
Yeah.
We got to sit by the side of the road and fix it, and then they realize that their actions matter and affect the whole group.
Right. Well, that's great. Now, let's take a look at some of the images that you captured from the ride. Where was this taken?
Okay, so we just pulled into Yarmouth, Maine, and we just rolled in. In fact, the local news center met us there and, took a little video and film of us and put us on the news. My mom flew up from Virginia to welcome us in. And so here we are at the end from left to right. That's Erich on the left, and then my buddy Hobbit and his daughter. That's my son Charlie, and then Owen in the red, and me, and Ian is on the right-hand side. And then you can also see the bikes there.
Sure, yeah. Everyone's still smiling. Well, that's great. Let's take a look at the next image, which is a closer image of the bike, and it's a stylized image. But you went with panniers rather than trailers. Why was that?
I almost brought my trailer. I have a Bob trailer, and I almost brought it, and I deliberated over this for weeks leading up to it. And then in the end, I told myself, well, look, if I take a trailer, I can throw the kitchen sink in it,
Yes.
And
too much.
Too much. And
A frying pan.
I think it was a good call. I mean, I know a lot of people like to tour with trailers, and that's great. Can I just give a shout out here to my niece, Abby Brocklebank, did that illustration, and that's based on a photograph of the actual, my buddy John, his bike and his panniers, but she did that illustration, and she did the other illustrations in the book that, you see in the book.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at the next image, because it's I think that's John Holloway setting up a picture, right?
Yep, that's in Paradise Valley, just north of Yellowstone, in the twilight, taking photographs. That's his daughter on the right. So that's one of the days off that we took. We took 3 days off on the entire trip. That was the first one. The second day off that we took was on the 4th of July in the middle of Wyoming, just sort of in a small town in Wyoming known as Ranchester. And it was the 4th of July, and we got together as a group and we decided, well, we think that's like the #1 DUI.
Is that right?
I think it is. I think it's the #1 like drunk driving day.
Might be a good day
in the United States. So we thought, well, we'll just chill out for the day.
No. Yeah. Well, you have another image that John must have taken from the road, and it occurred to me that you're riding in a group, and you talk a little bit about the conversations. Elaborate on that. When you were riding in groups, the conversations would begin. Give us a sense of how those would go.
I actually don't offhand know exactly where this was taken. It looks like eastern Wyoming or something, where the plains go on and on.
Yeah.
We intentionally chose back roads, out of the way roads, low traffic roads. So we would sometimes even for hours, just there'd be no cars or very, very few cars. So you can wander around the group and we'd separate. And you can get in some pretty long, deep conversations if you spend 6-8 hours a day on a bike.
Yeah.
So
and you're not going so fast that you can't talk. There's a conversational pace and a quiet road. I think the next image also shows a scene like that. And and you talk about the astronauts. There are 3 things. They start talking about the things they like, the things they dislike, and then the mission, right?
Right.
And what was the mission or the vision?
Well, the vision was that we were trying to complete this trip, together, in unity. But an interesting thing happened among the group. It became kind of, I'll use the word tribal.
Sure.
Like we were a real tribe. Right. And funny enough, when we were like out in the back roads of Wisconsin or Michigan or in the middle of nowhere, we'd swear a lot. Very.
I know. Yeah, you talked about that. Why was that? That just because of
I don't know. I think the kids started it, and maybe it was the candor or the honesty. And then we'd have a particular kind of vocabulary or language that we'd use among our group, and then we'd turn it off, of course, when we show up at a motel or a restaurant. It's important
to know how to swear well and not too outrageously. Well, let's see. I'm not sure we got a video or an image of that, but the next image shows, post 14A, I think, right? The route 14A was 15 or 30 miles of climbing, and you got to the top, and you were exhausted. Tell us a little bit about that section.
This turned into an iconic story on the trip. So on the trip, John and Erich and myself, we each had landmarks we wanted to hit. Like Erich really wanted to go over the Beartooth Pass, which is in the northeast corner of Yellowstone. And Hobbit really wanted to go into Yellowstone. I picked Devil's Tower. I really wanted to go to Devil's Tower.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Well, in this image, this is climbing up onto the Bighorn Plateau. So this is in the middle of Wyoming. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. The Bighorn Plateau rises out of, I forgot the name of the town. But it's like 14 miles to the base of this climb, and then this is called Route 14A, and it's super steep. It's in excess of 10%, parts of it are.
Wow.
The joke locally is that it says 10% because there's a Wyoming ordinance that no road exceed 10%, but it's actually 12 or 13 or 14% in places. And it goes on for well over 10, 12, 14
yes.
miles.
That's a serious climb. So
It's a big, long climb, and we're loaded down with a lot of gear. And so in this image, we're very close to the top, and we're exhausted lying on the, on the pavement.
Yeah.
But there's a moment at the bottom where when we started the climb, and it's almost 100 degrees, we're running out of water, and we kind of look around at the group, and one by one, we're saying to each other, I don't know if we can do this.
Really?
I don't know if we can pull this off.
Yeah.
And it was Owen. I mean, I'm going to give him credit for it, but we found a stream, and Erich pulled out his water purifier filter, and he refreshed everybody's water bottles. And then Owen looked around at everybody in the group, and he said, oh, we're absolutely doing this.
Yeah.
We're totally doing this.
Yeah, great.
So we took it in, we called it pitches, but a pitch was like, say, a quarter mile at a time. Like, let's get to that tree, or let's get to that bridge, or let's get
small steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you did. It would have been depressing to sort of look back and say we got stopped by this hill, and you made it. And even you made it with an RB2, right? Which
Right.
Probably doesn't have a rear cog greater than 28. I don't know.
I was down in my
You were in the
bottom
last
gear.
one, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was bottomed out.
Let's take a look at the next image.
Tons and tons of climbing. And so actually, I referenced the Bighorn Plateau. When we got to the eastern edge of the Bighorn Plateau, there's a big drop. It's like you drop, I don't know, I'm going to guess like 4,000 feet or something down to the
right.
plateau below,
Right.
the
basin.
and the basin below. And we lingered at the top to take in the view, because it's this beautiful, expansive view of the plains to the east. And in that moment, I looked around and I was like, everybody, you realize, like, this is the last time we're going to be at any elevation for another, like, until we hit the Appalachian.
Right, right.
For another month.
If that. Yeah,
right?
Yeah, no, wow.
For another month, this is like, we're just going to be in the flats.
Soak it in. Well, I think the next image is from, Beartooth Pass.
Yeah, this particular image, I think actually is climbing Chinook Pass in the Cascades.
Right.
So this is very early. This is day 2 or day 3, and we're climbing over Chinook Pass. This is just north of Mount Rainier, and the day that we did it was around June 9, 10, 11, and they just opened the pass only 2 days earlier.
Yeah, so it's remarkable. You went from T-shirts or you were wearing wet weather gear, all the way to T-shirts and shorts.
Right.
That's pretty unusual, I would think. Well, it's an adventure. I guess it's standard.
We mailed a lot of stuff home.
Oh, all right, perfect.
Yep.
Well, the next image I think was a group shot at the top of the pass, and tell the story about that, because I think someone stopped and
Yes.
gave you a ride up there. Or what happened?
So, out of the northeast corner of Yellowstone National Park, from Cook City, you climb up the Beartooth Pass, and the Beartooth Pass is a long, long grind. I mean, it takes most of the day to climb up to the pass. The top of Beartooth. And at the top, the snow starts to appear more and more and thicker into snowbanks. And then finally, when we arrived at the top, or near the top, we're just a couple miles short, there's a little general store near the top. They call it Top of the World, although it's not actually at the top of Beartooth.
Okay, yeah. Right. Who's checking, you feel like it. Yeah.
And we stopped at this little general store, and they said, oh no, you can't go over the top because it's sleeting and there's snow and it's too dangerous. So we kind of hung out for a little bit until this guy took John, to drive up to the top and just take a look at it.
Right.
And then he came back and he said, no, the road's clear, let's do it. And so in this image, we're like right at the top taking a picture.
Perfect. Well, the question I want to finish with is how. This is a great adventure, but how did it change you, and were you surprised?
Yes, I will say this. I would recommend anyone who's contemplating a trip like this to do it. And the hardest part is not doing it. The hardest part is getting to the starting line, because it is so deeply memorable. I can sit down at the kitchen table with our son, and we can recount every single night and every single day and every person we met and every meal we had. and I can't tell you what I did last Tuesday,
Right.
because you you get into the rhythm of your life.
Yeah.
But it's indelible, the memories that we have from this experience.
Right, and that's great. And you've captured it so well in this book. It's not just text, it's glorious color images, a coffee book style book. Where can people obtain the book?
You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from our website, which is my company's called Mind Scaling, or local bookstores in Maine. In the book, all of the imagery is done by John Holloway, and I wrote the narrative, the text, but all the images and the pictures are his.
Okay, well, it's a great read. Thanks so much, Shawn, for coming down and telling us about it.
Thank you, Fred. I'm psyched to be here.
All right, everybody, that was Shawn Hunter, and you can find his book, Chasing Dawn, an adventure of 3 fathers and 4 teenagers bicycling across America, online or at local bookstores in Maine. That's all we've got time for right now. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you again soon. All Things Bike is brought to you by FitWorks, Rider First Bike Fitting, Rider Matched Bike Sales. Locations in Peabody, Massachusetts, Waitsville, Vermont, and Ridgefield Park, New Jersey. And Frame and Wheel, eBay selling services for cyclists, bike shops, bike companies, and cycling-related nonprofit organizations. Time, space, cash, pick 3. And AD Bikes, the modern face of Austro-Daimler cycling and the bike company of the future. Become Bike. Become AD Bike.